Hi, I'm Riley Moynes. I was finding it a bit of a challenge when I retired. I wasn't sure kind of what to expect. I didn't, I just didn't know what to expect. And I was busy enough, but I really didn't find or feel that I was doing things that were particularly meaningful and important to me. And as we kind of worked through it, I began to do some work and try to find out what a successful retirement looked like. Really couldn't find much in the literature at all related to investments and insurance and wills and estate planning and so on. So I just undertook to do a number of interviews with as many people as I could find who I thought looked to me like they were successful retirees. And the result of that was the book, the Four Phases of Retirement. The background really to my involvement right now is that when I stepped away from the business, I was experiencing some of the challenges that I document in the book. I didn't have a framework for it. I didn't know what it was at the time. And I decided that I wanted to try to find out more, not only for myself, but perhaps for others as well. So when I started to look at the research, it was all about investments and insurance and taxes and estate planning. And I just really couldn't find anything that was meaningful to me in the literature. So I identified a number of people that I thought were successful retirees, and I asked them what made a successful retirement in their opinion. And over the course of dozens and dozens of interviews over months and months, it kind of emerged that there seemed to be a bit of a pattern. I just wish that I knew then what I know now about these four phases of retirement. I've never really had anyone who felt that they were incorrect, that they were inappropriate. Everyone seems to think that, yeah, these are kind of the phases that I've experienced. People experience them for different periods of time and in different levels of intensity, but almost everyone seems to experience these four phases. So my hope is that through the book that people reading it can either have a heads up as to what they might expect if they're not retired, or if they are retired, that the framework can help them to make more sense of it all than they might have otherwise. I found that in many cases people have found that it was helpful to them, and that's very gratifying for me, of course, as well. So I do a lot of workshops now, really across the country, usually with financial advisors who are attempting to provide a kind of a value add to their clients, because this is not a topic that many financial advisors get into with their clients, but it's something that they recognize increasingly is important, and so I like to think I'm providing a bit of a service. Hi, I'm Riley Moynes, author of The Four Phases of Retirement. I'm going to ask you to join me on a journey today where we're going to look at retirement from an entirely different perspective from the one that you're used to. For people who are not yet retired, this presentation and the book will provide you with a heads up as to what to expect. For those who are retired, it's going to help you make sense of some of the inevitable changes and challenges that you'll experience. Everybody says you've got to get ready financially. No. You've got to get ready psychologically. Lee Iacocca, former chairman of Chrysler Corporation. So this is a book about retirement, but one written from a different perspective. Usually retirement books focus on elements of investments or insurance, estate plans, having your will in place, powers of attorney, and of course, those are all important. But I'm assuming that you're getting good financial advice, and I'm also assuming that you're in reasonably good health. So I'm with Iacocca, emphasizing the psychological aspects of retirement. It's kind of like the elephant in the room that no one's been discussing, but we're going to start discussing it today. Let's start with some background. You know a lot of this information, I'm sure, but the first baby boomers, that is those of us born between 1946 and 1965, hit retirement age 65 in 2011. Boomers now represent 27% of the Canadian population, but only 18 to 20% of boomers have reached age 65 as yet.
the peak will not come for another 10 years. We're experiencing right now a retirement landslide, a tsunami of retirement. 10,000 North Americans retire every day. And in the next hour or so, about 1,700 North Americans will retire. Boomers over 65 now represent just about 16% of the population of Canada, double what it was back in 1971, but about half of what it will be in the next 10 to 15 years. So think about that, 10,000 North Americans retiring every day. At the same time, life expectancy continues to grow. In 1950, life expectancy, 68 years, 3 years of retirement. And that's where we get the image of the folks in the top corner here doddering their way towards their rocking chair to live out and to wait the end. By 2000, life expectancy was 76 years, 11 years of expected retirement. By 2010, as you can see, it had grown to 81, 15, 16 years of expected retirement. And the most recent figures available for 2018 indicate life expectancy in Canada of 86 years, 21 years of expected retirement. Now that figure is provided by the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, and sometimes people ask me what's the difference between an actuary and an accountant. And the best distinction that I've been able to come up with is to say that an actuary didn't have quite enough personality to become an accountant. So that gives you an idea of where they are on the personality scale. So we're living longer than ever before, and it's fair to say that many who are watching this presentation can expect to live up to 1/3 of their lives in retirement. And that's an astounding figure when you compare it to 1950, when life expectancy was just 3 years of retirement. 1/3 of our lives in retirement is the norm. A couple of years ago, Prudential Insurance Company set up a great big board in a park in Austin, Texas. And they provided living proof that we all need to plan for a longer retirement. The board, as you can see, was about 10 feet high and about 30 feet long. And they put some numbers on the board. They started on the left side with the number 60, and then there's the vertical line indicating retirement age 65 and 70 and 80 and 90 and 100 and 110. As people saw this going up and they began to wonder what was going on, there was quite a crowd that emerged. And what they did when they got it all finished was to hand out discs that were kind of like frisbees, about the same size as a frisbee. And they asked people to take the disc that they had been given and to place it on the wall to represent the age of the oldest living person that they know. And you can see what happened. If we look at average life expectancy at about 85, but look how many of the discs are placed to the right of that to represent ages older than that. Many in 80s, 90s, even over 100. My mom just turned 100 a couple of months ago. And as we were visiting her, and I was sharing with her that I told her, you know, Mom, I really don't know many people who are 100 years old. And she thought for a moment, and then she said to me, well, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. I thought that was kind of cute. So the question is, if we're going to live as old as that, if there's a good likelihood that we're going to spend up to 1/3 of our lives in retirement, the question then becomes, how do we spend that time productively and meaningfully? And that's what we want to talk about today. But before we do, I need to tell you a story. I'm lucky enough to spend some time in the winter in a golf community in Florida. And golf is central to the activities, but there are lots of other things that go on as well. And I belong to a walking club. And we meet at the tennis courts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning at 7 o'clock. And our purpose is expressly to put, if we can, 10,000 steps on our Fitbits. And then we end up going to Panera's for coffee and donuts. But during our walks, we've got in the habit of having discussions, and we talked about books and sports and movies and all kinds of things. My American friends love to talk about politics, so some of that as well, although there hasn't been quite as much of that in the last couple of years, I must admit. But one particular day, the topic for discussion was, what are the elements of a successful retirement? How's that for 7 o'clock in the morning? So we walked and we talked and we kicked the topic around, and then we went to Panera's, and the next day we went on to another topic of discussion. But it was a topic that stuck with me because at the time I was having some difficulties. I thought I had a pretty good idea of what success looked like in a working career, in business or in professions, but when it came to retirement, it was fuzzier. It was fuzzier for me. So what I did was to start by looking at as much of the research on the topic as I could, and I discovered that almost all of the research on the topic suggested that a successful retirement came if you had a good, solid investment portfolio, and if your will was in place, and if you had your powers of attorney in place, and all of those important things. There was almost nothing written about success from the other perspective. So I decided then that I would start to interview people and ask them the question, what are the elements that make a successful retirement? And over the course of the next 12 or 18 months, I interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And what I came up with, what I discovered was that there is a framework, there is a pattern that can help you understand about it if you know what you're looking for. So with that, let me ask you to have a look at the 99 game here. And what I'm going to ask you to do in the next couple of minutes is you'll notice that the 99 game has numbers on it from 1 to 99. So when I say go, not yet, but when I say go, I'm going to ask you to find number 1 and circle it, find number 2 and circle it, find number 3 and circle it, and so on, and go as high as you can in ascending order up all the way to 99 in the next 30 seconds. Ready? Go. Pens down, as Alex says. Hands up, all of those who got to 99. People laugh. Hands up those who got to number 50. No. 40. No. 30. No. 20. No. So the purpose of the exercise is not to cause undue embarrassment, but rather to make a point. Let me give you some information that might be helpful. I'm going to ask you to take a pencil and more or less draw a vertical line down the middle of the page. Now do a horizontal line approximately across the middle of the page. So we've now got 4 more or less equal quarters. And let me point out, if it hasn't become clear as yet, that number 1 is in the top right-hand quadrant. Number 2 is in the top left-hand quadrant. Number 3 is in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And number 4 is in the bottom right-hand quadrant, and so on. Now, with this new information, I'm going to ask you to pick up where you left off at number 4 or 5 or whatever it was you got to last time. And in the next 30 seconds, I'm going to ask you to go as far as you can up that scale again. Ready? Go. Okay, how many people got further the second time than they did the first time? Everybody. How do you account for that? Well, usually people tell me it's because they knew what they were looking for. They had a plan, there was a framework, and all of those are correct. And so really what I'm trying to do here today is to provide you with that kind of a framework, a way of looking at retirement that is going to help make it easier for you to understand a lot of the changes and challenges that you're going to experience if you have not yet retired. So when we're finished, about 30 minutes from now, you are going to know what the 4 phases of retirement are. And if you're retired, you're going to know what phase you're in currently. And you're also going to have with you 4 tools that you can use at home to develop and work on a little bit later on that will help you to get to phase 4. And I have to tell you that the goal, I hope your goal will be to get to phase 4. That's where you want to spend as much of the time in your retirement as you possibly can. So let's get started. Phase 1, that's what we call vacation phase. And the reason for it is that it's just like a vacation. When you retire, vacation phase generally lasts for between 1 and 3 years. That's my experience. What happens during vacation phase is that people are busy clicking off or checking off the things that they have developed on their bucket list over the last 20 or 30 years. Things that they wanted to do, wanted to achieve, wanted to acquire perhaps, but didn't have the time or the resources to do at that time. So the bucket list activities include, fulfilling lifelong dreams, whatever that may be. Travel is often a part of phase 1. It's a big part of phase 1. Maybe people decide they're going to improve their golf game or their tennis game or their pickleball game. Maybe they're going to buy a sports car or a new boat, or perhaps it's going to be the purchase of a property in a warmer climate. That's a big one as well. And one of the things that people really appreciate most about phase 1 is that they have no set routine. I mean, that's just about what a vacation is like, right? What you like about a vacation is that you don't have a set routine. You can get up when you want, go to bed when you want, do what you want, when you want, with whom you want. That's one of the beauties of a vacation. And so, as I say, that phase generally lasts between 1 and 3 years. But interestingly enough, many people think that phase 1, the vacation phase, is what retirement's all about. And it is for the short term, but it's not for the long term. Because what happens is that at the end of this phase, whatever length of time it takes for you, there's a problem. And the problem is that while we at the beginning loved the fact that we have no routine, the truth is that a year or 2 in, it seems that we're genetically wired to need a routine. And people who don't have a routine for an extended period of time start to feel kind of at loose ends. And they actually get bored, is one of the things that we've discovered in our research. And when you start to feel that little bit of boredom and you figure that's not what retirement was supposed to be about, you start reading things that suggest that retirement is like a plunge into the abyss of insignificance. And you think, hey, yeah, I can relate to that. So this drop from the top is one of life's top 10 traumas. You see, we spend the first 20 years or so of our lives getting ready to be productive members of society, right? We're educated, we're taught to show up on time and to say please and thank you and do all the things that are going to help us to be successful in our working career. And then comes our working career, which could easily be 40 years or so, learning the rules, conditioned to a job-based routine, climbing the ladder, maybe taking on some more responsibility. But sooner or later, whether it's your choice or someone else's, it all comes to an end. And one day, it's over. and we face the next part of our life, which could be a third of our life. It could be 30 years of our life without any kind of rules, without any kind of knowledge of what to expect. So many people retire without a clue as to some of the challenges that they're going to be facing. At this point, we're in phase 2. And phase 2 is the phase that I refer to as one where we feel loss and we feel lost. It's the most difficult of the 4 phases, and it's the one that we want to spend as little time in as possible. In phase 2, almost everyone suffers 5 significant and virtually unavoidable losses. We lose a sense of structure. As I say, we sometimes don't care for the structure, especially if it's imposed by somebody else. But as human beings, we seem to require structure. And when we don't have it, we feel ill at ease and we can feel like a fish out of water. When we retire, we lose that structure, at least in the short term. We lose our identity. Many of us, males in particular, but certainly not exclusively, draw our identity from our job, our profession, or our calling. And when that job is gone, there's a big hole in our identity as well, and it can be very painful. We lose relationships. Some of the relationships that we establish with work colleagues are significant, and we work with people for extended periods of time. And then we walk away and they carry on still working, and those relationships are a major loss for many people. We lose a sense of purpose. For many of us, we love our jobs. It gives us a sense of purpose. It gives us a reason to get up in the morning. We have our goals, our short-term, long-term goals. In many cases, when we lose that job or when we step away from that job, we also sense a real loss of purpose. And finally, a sense of power. Over the course of 30 or 40 years of a work career, it may well be that we take on some responsibilities. We may be responsible for some staff or for budgets. And when we step away, that power is immediately gone, and all of a sudden we're just a guy or a gal in the street. And so these 5 significant unavoidable losses can add up to some real problems. And the fact is, it would be bad enough if each of these losses were thrust upon us at different times so that we could kind of have an opportunity to get used to one loss before we experience the next one. But no, these losses come all at once. It's kind of like bam, bam, bam. It's kind of like we've been hit by a heavyweight boxer, and it can be really, really painful. And so these 5 losses are significant for many people. Also in phase 2, we are at greater risk for experiencing depression. The world-famous Mayo Clinic says that there is a 40% likelihood that you'll exhibit some signs of clinical depression when you retire. 40% likelihood that that will be the case. We suffer physical decline because when we retire, in many cases, we don't keep up with our exercise routine. Mental decline as we age. And accompanied with this is a spike for many people in alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and some of the divorce statistics are really quite astounding. In North America, divorces among people over 50 have doubled, and for those over 65, the rate has tripled since 1990. And you know what the highest suicide rates are in Canada today? Men over 75. Highest rate of suicide in the country today. So with these 5 losses and the attendant problems that can come to us, it can make us feel like we've been hit by a bus. Or that the rug's been pulled out from under us and we've really fallen hard. You see, it's true. Before we achieve some of the good things that can happen in phases 3 and 4, we are going to experience feelings of fear and uncertainty and anxiety. That's just the way it is. All of the research points in that direction, and all of my interviews say the very same thing. Because it's only when we suffer these 5 losses that we really begin to ponder what's important in our lives. It's almost like an addict who has to hit bottom before they can kind of come to their senses and realize that they have to make a change, or things are going to just get worse if that's possible. Now, the good news is that most of us, sooner or later, come to grips with this, and we say to ourselves or to a spouse or to someone who is a trusted friend that we just don't want to carry on like this. We can't spend the rest of our lives like this. And the rest of our lives, remember, could be 1/3 of those lives. 30 years is quite possible. And when we do make that decision to move on, that's the good news. That's when the rehab can begin. That's when we start to move towards phase 3. Phase 3 is the trial and error phase. You know you're in phase 3 when you start to ask yourself, what can I do that's going to make me feel that I'm making some sort of a contribution, something that is meaningful to me, something that's important to me? When you start asking those questions, that's a good sign that you've entered phase 3. It's important to understand, though, that in phase 3, there are often going to be false starts, and I'm going to share with you a couple of personal false starts, but it's unusual that kind of the first bright idea that we come up with in phase 3 is the one that we carry through on. That's unusual. Most of us tend to choose initiatives that are based on our experiences, some of our abilities, some of our interests, and that's a good place to start, I have found. But again, it's important to realize that when things fizzle, as they quite likely will, we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to keep working at it, because really the option, if we just say, if it doesn't work, then I give up, then you're back in phase 2. Don't want to be in phase 2. So let me share with you a couple of trial and error, with the emphasis on error, that I've experienced. I came to know a couple of years ago about an organization called the First Tee. It's a youth-based program, or at least a youth development program based in golf. And it intends to teach young people some of the basic principles that are going to help them succeed: honesty and integrity and perseverance, that kind of thing. The First Tee is a very successful program in the United States. It's been supported by the Masters Golf Tournament, by the Professional Golfers Association, the PGA, by the LPGA, the Ladies Professional Golf Association, and a number of individual pro golfers, including Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, Ricky Fowler, have all contributed $1 million or more to the First Tee. They believe in it, and it's a very popular program in the United States. Well, I had this idea that if it's that good, and I do believe it is, then let's have one in Canada. Well, it turned out that there are already 2 in Canada, one in Montreal, one in Vancouver. And I live in the Toronto area, and I thought, well, hey, there are 6 million people here. There's an opportunity for a First Tee in the greater Toronto area. So I spent probably 12 to 18 months going through all of this with the folks at the First Tee. Their headquarters are at the World Golf Hall of Fame in St. Augustine, Florida. They were keen on it. They've got some significant hoops that you have to jump through in order to qualify for this. And they were supportive of what we were trying to do. But what happened for me, unfortunately, was that between the time of the creation of the First Tee chapters in Montreal and Vancouver, there was created in Canada an organization called Golf Canada. We love this. We do Tennis Canada, Hockey Canada. We do all kinds of things. Revenue Canada. We love those sorts of things. So Golf Canada was given the mandate to develop golf in Canada, including youth golf. And when I approached them, wishing to establish and looking for their support to create a First Tee chapter in the Toronto area, they said, no, we've got a program that is every bit as good as the First Tee program. They're delusional in my view, but that was their position. And they said, in fact, we are not going to allow the creation of another First Tee in Canada. The First Tee folks in the U.S. wanted to go ahead, but they said, we're not going to fight with Golf Canada. And so about 2 years in, after a lot of work and effort and ultimately disappointment, that one came to an end. So that was a trial and error with a focus on error. One other example, there's an organization that I became aware of when I was in Florida as well called Watchdogs. Dogs standing for Dads of Great Students. And the concept there is that there is an underrepresentation of males in elementary schools, both in Canada and the US. Most of the staff is female, much of the secretarial staff female as well. And the idea here was that by encouraging dads or uncles or grandparents of children who are going to the schools, that there could be some enhanced male role modeling. Many of the children just don't have dads at home. They could do some mentoring, and there is research that suggests that a male presence probably has an impact and reduces bullying in the schoolyard as well. So made an effort to get going with that, had some support from the folks in the United States, but ultimately they said to me, Riley, we're growing so quickly in the US, we just don't have what they call the bandwidth to help you get it started in Canada. And so that was another disappointment that represented another 12 months or so of effort. Happy to report a couple of successes, though, too, along the way. You may be familiar with a group called the Probus Clubs. These are clubs that are designed for semi-retired and retired folks. They are strictly social in their intent, and they're growing rapidly across Canada as the number of people who retire every day grows as well. And Probus Clubs are really mushrooming. I live in an area of Toronto that represented about 200,000 people, and there was no Probus Club. And I looked around and I saw that a little bit to the west of us in Burlington, a population of about 200,000, they had 4 Probus Clubs. I thought there has to be a place for a Probus Club in my area. And so I set to work on that, and we had some bumps and grinds along the way, but ultimately I'm happy to say that we were successful in establishing a Probus Club in my area. And just about a year in now, we've reached our capacity of 150 members, and a growing club that's got lots of activities going on that I'm delighted to have had some small role in. Also, I want to tell you briefly about Water Ambassadors of Canada. This is a charity that I've come to know about. It provides clean drinking water to people who don't have it. The lack of drinking water, of clean drinking water or unclean drinking water, is the world's single largest cause of disease and death, and it's among the easiest to solve. So I've become involved with that one, and again, really had some gratification from doing that. So we have to keep at it. I've been lucky to have found a couple of successes, and I'm sure that you will too in phase 3. Phase 4, that's the phase that represents reinvention and repurposing. And I have to say that not everyone breaks through to phase 4, unfortunately. My research suggests that only between 50 and 60% of people actually get through to phase 4. Other people, a few people that I know of, remain in phase 1. A larger number than I would like to know about are in phase 2. Some people are struggling in phase 3. But those who do reach phase 4 are among the happiest people that I have ever known. And it's part of the reason that I'm just so supportive and hopeful that you'll decide that phase 4 is where you would like to be as well. Phase 4 requires some introspection, and it requires us asking ourselves some tough questions. A lot of us are not particularly introspective, and we don't often ask ourselves some of these tough questions, but they are, in my opinion, prerequisites for phase 4. We have to stop and think and make some decisions about what it is that we're really trying to do. What is it that in the last part of our lives, in this 1/3 of our lives that could represent retirement, that is going to be meaningful to us and that will allow us to make a contribution? We have to ask ourselves, what is my mission, or what's my purpose, or bluntly, why am I here? And my experience, both personally and in all of the interviews that I've conducted, is that it almost always involves service of some sort. It doesn't have to be volunteer service, There's nothing wrong with providing services and being compensated for it as well. But one of the common themes that I've discovered is that it almost always involves service. Winston Churchill says we make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. And that's the service element. It can make us feel really, really productive and satisfied if we're providing some sort of service. Have a look here at the target, if you would, and I want to chat briefly about what it says. You'll notice that at the outside rim, it indicates that there are things at which I am incompetent. By being on the outside rim, it implies, quite accurately, that there is a wide range of things at which I am completely incompetent. And I suspect that that's true for you as well. As we move closer to the circle, there is a smaller number of things that you do competently. If required, I can deliver a reasonably good tasting barbecued hamburger, if required. If my sons aren't around to bail me out, I can do that competently. There is a smaller number of things that I do very well. And the same is true for you. There is a number of things that you do really well. But in the middle, what I call unique ability are the things that I love to do and that I do superbly well. And you are in that same situation. There is a thing or things that you love to do and that you do superbly well. I call that thing or those things unique ability. And I don't mean by that no one else on earth has that same ability. I don't mean that at all. I simply mean that there are some things that you do extremely well. And you may not have thought about exactly what those things are, but we have to. We're going to take a moment to do so. So one of the tools that I want you to take away is this one called unique ability. And when we work on this for a moment, I'm going to ask you to consider writing down on that sheet what are the things that you love to do and what are the things that you do really well. It's not a time to be self-deprecating. It's a time for honesty. There are a number of things that you do really well. And I think it's important that you note what they are. And during our workshop, we take some time to let people get started on that. You're going to be able to acquire this particular tool, and I hope you'll do so. And you'll take some time to write down some of the things that you love to do and that you do extremely well. So this is the first of the tools that I'm going to provide that you can take away. Next, high points. It's important that we look back and to think about some of the things that have been successful for us in our lives. So with this next tool, high points, I'd like you to consider and write down 5 successes or highlights, breakthroughs, or victories that you've achieved so far in your life. Here's the tool. I've got it organized, as you can see, kind of chronologically here, and it may be easier to do it that way. But the important thing is, I really want you to make a note of a minimum of 5. You could probably do 50, but let's just focus on 5 successes, highlights, victories that you have achieved up to this point in your career. That's tool number 2. Thirdly, it's important that we look at common threads. Common threads. What are the connections between those things that you love to do and the things that you do really well? So for this part of the exercise, I'll ask you to take tool number 1, your unique ability, place it side by side, tool number 2, the 5 victories or successes that you've achieved, and look for areas of connection. And I'm sure you'll find it, because it makes sense, doesn't it? That some of the things that you love to do and do really well have led to success in your life. So don't just look at it, if you would. I'm going to ask you to take a marker of some sort and physically draw those connections so that you can see it and that you can feel it in your mind. Because when we can see what these common threads are, we're getting really close to where we want to be. Tool number 4. When we combine things that represent our passion with the things that we're really good at, so these are both elements of your unique ability, things that you love to do and things that you do really well. And then when we overlay on that a desire to make a difference, and the reason I do that is that in almost every single interview that I've conducted, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, it almost invariably comes out in one way or another, not always with those exact words, but people want to make a difference, a positive difference. They want to do some little thing that makes the world a better place than they found it. So my theory is that when we overlay these 3 circles, and in that small dark area that I've highlighted as the sweet spot, that's where all 3 of them overlap. That small area, that represents, in effect, your passion, your mission, your life's purpose, what I like to call your sweet spot. That's the area where you want to spend as much of your time as you possibly can. That's the area that's going to give you the greatest amount of satisfaction and feeling of accomplishment. And those are wonderful feelings, as you know, to experience. So, tool number 4, my life's purpose. And you'll see that I've noted there 6 or 7 or 8 of the phrases that people have developed in previous workshops. And what I would encourage you to do would be, as succinctly as you can, taking into account the things that you love to do and do really well, and your desire to make a difference, I'd like you to write down, as I say, as succinctly as you possibly can, your life's purpose. What is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to focus on? What is it that you want to spend time on that will give you a terrific sense of accomplishment and satisfaction? As I say, these tools require some introspection, but my experience is that it's worth it. Those people who are prepared to put some time into it can really begin to look forward to phase 4 in a very focused kind of way. So specifically, I encourage you to state your life's purpose. My life's purpose is to make a positive difference in the lives of others through education. That's what I love to do. That's what I'm doing here today. You'll be the judge of how successful we are. It's what I do in my writing. It's what I do in my volunteer work. It focuses me. It keeps me working on things that I love to do. And it allows me to make decisions on other things, to say thank you, but no thank you. It's not part of what I'm about. It's a very powerful thing to be able to do, and I hope you'll be able to do it before long. Interesting study conducted by Harvard Business School. This was a 20-year study involving 15,000 retirees who were Harvard Business School graduates. And you can imagine that, being a Harvard Business School report, that it was a lengthy, heavy tome, and in fact it was. But one of the key findings is the one that I'm quoting here. The unhappiest retirees of all had not gone on to do anything productive beyond pleasing themselves. What an indictment. That, ladies and gentlemen, that's phase 1 behavior. It's all about me. And there's a time and a place for that. But that's not the way we want to spend 30 years of our retirement. The unhappiest retirees had not gone on to do anything productive beyond pleasing themselves. So the point of it is, I think, that it's one thing to know what our strengths are. It's one thing to know what we love to do. It's one thing to know what our successes have been, but that has to be followed up with intent. We have to apply that, because knowing it doesn't do any good. It's no good until we can apply it. I hope you'll do that. Most of us, I think you'll agree, need to find activities that we find meaningful, that give us a sense of purpose. And to do as what Steve Jobs so eloquently stated, to put our own little dent in the universe. And we're likely not to make the kind of dent that Steve Jobs did, but we all can make a little dent in the universe. Maybe it's doing charitable work. Maybe it's delivering pizzas. Maybe it's mentoring students. Maybe it's being a wonderful grandparent. Maybe it's getting involved with Probus. Anything it can be. Maybe it's this. This is a friend of mine. Tim Burrows is his name. And he has been an early adopter of electric vehicle technology. He's owned 2 or 3 Tesla vehicles already. And what he's done is to put together a little program that he presents to church groups, Probus groups, almost anybody who will listen, that helps people understand some of the history of electric vehicles. And it's a much longer history than many people realize. And he shows his car, he brings his car along, and as you can see in this case, it's been a visit to an elementary school, and the kids are looking in the trunk saying, where the heck's the engine? No engine. But he loves to do that. He does it 50 or 60 times a year. He gets great satisfaction from it. No pay involved. It's just a volunteer thing. He loves to share his knowledge of electric vehicles. And so that's one thing. Maybe it's this. Old coots giving advice. Here's the background. This group of about 6 folks met regularly. They live in Salt Lake City, Utah, by the way. They met regularly on a Saturday morning in a deli. The fellow on the left with the straw hat, he's the owner of the deli. And they used to meet there every Saturday morning, and they would have coffee, and they would solve many of the world's problems in the hour or hour and a half that they spent there. The fellow a little bit further back owns a kitchen cabinet company. The lady in the back with the dark glasses was a teacher. The fellow to her left, also with glasses. Now, he's not an old coot. He doesn't qualify yet. He's not old enough to be an old coot, but he's a coot in training, learning all the ropes. And the fellow in the front here with the red t-shirt, he was a teacher. One day they decided, I think led by the teacher, they decided that they had amongst them hundreds of years of experience in a variety of different areas. And what they decided that they were going to do was to set up a booth in the local farmers market. And this is the booth. And they set it up, and it's, as you can see, signed as Old Coots Giving Advice. Probably bad advice, but it's free. So they've done this, and they'll admit that they got off to a fairly slow start. One of their first visitors was a young kid who was looking for help with his math homework, so they helped him with his math homework. One of the early visitors as well was the lady who wanted advice as to how she could prevent her cat from peeing on her living room rug. And they did the best that they could there. Now they get a steady stream of people looking for advice on a whole range of topics. And according to the teacher in the red t-shirt, they are now the most popular spot at the farmer's market. That hasn't been proven, but he's convinced that that's the case. But here's a sign that they've gotten some traction. Guess what? They've now got their own weekly podcast, Old Coots Giving Advice, and you can find it on almost any podcast channel. So that's another possibility. Anytime, as Rick Warren, a well-known author, best-selling author, he says, anytime you use your God-given abilities to help others, you are fulfilling your calling. And the range of things that you can do to achieve that, as you can see, is virtually limited only by your imagination. So remember, you are not alone in this transition. I'm always intrigued by the fact that people that I interview, they sometimes give me the sense that, oh, poor me, I'm going through all this and no one else has ever experienced this sort of thing, and poor me. And I say, come on, 10,000 North Americans a day are retiring. You're not alone in this. Talk to somebody else and you'll find out what they're up to. But the good news is we've got more options to consider and probably longer to do it than ever before in recorded human history. I mean, what an opportunity to make the most of a significant time of your life. So we have this great opportunity to combine the passions, our strengths, the things that we love to do to make the world a better place. And that leads me to a story about my friend Bill. Bill is a neighbor of mine in our Florida golf community. And Bill had this idea that we could be more than just a golf community. Now, I should tell you that Bill spent 40 years as a dentist imposing pain and suffering on many people, but you can tell by the look on his face that he's not a pain and suffering kind of guy. But he had this idea that in our community of about 1,000 doors, as they call it, that there was a tremendous range of experience and ability, and he believed that if you asked people for help, they would give it to you. So he had this idea that, as I say, while golf is important in our community, there's more to life than golf. And so he and I, he was the leader, I was just kind of helping him out a little bit. We started to go around to people who we knew had some particular skills. And there was one fellow who was a terrific bridge player and a well-known bridge teacher. And we asked him, would you, on a volunteer basis, teach people who want to learn how to play bridge? And he said, yeah, of course I will. And there was a lady who was a terrific watercolor artist. And we asked her, would you teach people who want to learn how to do watercolors? Of course, she said. Bill is big and an early adopter of iPads, iPhones, Mac computers, and we knew full well that any given year in our community, many of our residents had been given these new technology devices by their children for Christmas in many cases, and they didn't have a clue how to use them beyond maybe turning it on, but they had no idea of all the things that they could do. So Bill decided that he would do an iPhone workshop and an iPad workshop and a Mac computer workshop. So here's what happened. In the first year, we had 9 programs that were offered. Everybody who volunteered did so free, and everybody who showed up did it with no cost. 246 members of our community took advantage of those offerings in the first year. In the second year, the number of programs grew by popular demand from 9 to 45, and the number of participants grew from 246 to 694. In year 3, the programs doubled from 45 to 90, and the number of participants grew from 694 to 1,794. And last year, we had 115 programs, up from 90 the year before, and we had over 2,100 participants, up from 1,700 the year before. This is what can happen when somebody sees an opportunity, when somebody wants to make a difference, when they can combine their interests to try to provide service and make the world a slightly better place. Our community has thrived as a result of this. It's just changed the nature of our community. And this is really the part that I love the most. This is kind of the secret sauce of phase 4. This is the magic of it all. Because if you'll think back, in phase 2, we talked about the 5 unavoidable losses that people almost invariably experience, right? Well, in phase 4, they're all reborn. So Bill has an entirely new structure for his life. He lost his old one, yes, but he's got an entirely new structure for his life now. He goes around trying to make good things happen in our community. He has a new identity. He's no longer Bill the dentist who imposes pain. He's Bill the guy who gets things done and creates all kinds of new programs. New relationships. You know, when you go around asking people to volunteer and you talk to 20 or 30 or 40 people, you're going to create some new relationships and some new friendships, and that's exactly what he's done. He has a renewed purpose. He's committed to providing more and more of these programs, and he just loves the kind of feedback that we're getting from the people who participate in them. And although Bill couldn't care less about enhanced power, he has empowered hundreds, if not thousands of people in our community. That's what can happen in phase 4 when someone decides that they want to make a difference. So, in review and as we finish up, there are 4 identifiable phases of retirement. It is virtually impossible to avoid any of them. You know now, I hope, what phase you're in if you're retired. And you also are aware that phase 2 is the most dangerous phase. It's the one that we want to try to avoid or to spend as little time in as we possibly can. So it's really critical to do our very best to identify some things, some passions, some commitments that we can get ourselves into and make contributions and spend as little time possible in phase 2. Final thoughts. It's okay to get tired, but don't retire, at least not in the traditional sense. When you're finished learning, changing, reinventing yourself, and working to stay involved, only then are you finished. So we're saying now, don't retire, rewire. Take the things that you're good at, take your experiences, apply them in a new situation, and you'll really enjoy what you're experiencing. So, back to Lee. Everyone says you've got to get ready financially. No. You've got to get ready psychologically. And I'm hoping that you're determined that you're going to be ready to get to phase 4. Phase 4, phase 4. That's where you want to be. And if I may, since this is one of my favorite charities, if you should decide that part of your voyage to phase 4 or part of your involvement in phase 4 might be of interest to you, to examine Water Ambassadors Canada. Contaminated water is the world's largest cause of death and disease, and it is the easiest to fix. Check us out if you would at waterambassadorscanada.org, and good luck as you move through retirement to phase 4. Bye for now.